knowing that I could be a mom and a great mom and I could enjoy it and I could love it. And then I could also love and enjoy going to work and making a difference in that space as well.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining me. My name is Reesa and I'm your host. We are talking to real families about real stories here on The Real Family Eats, where we've got food for thought and thoughtful food. So let's eat. My guest today, everyone, is the wonderful Doctora Amanda. Hi, Amanda. Thanks so much for joining us and being a guest on the show today.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, for anybody who doesn't know you yet, can you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. So my name is Doctora Amanda Corona. I am a first-generation college student, first-generation doctoral person. I'm a mother of two and a wife, a daughter, a sister, an aunt, all of the above. I'm excited to be here today.
Wonderful. Now, I know that you've got your social media that you're sharing with us today. For anybody who wants to follow you, what are some of the things that they'll be seeing?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram, I'm on LinkedIn. A lot of the stuff I post is either about me and my family and the activities that we're doing or about work. I work in higher education and access to education is really important to me. And I feel like sharing that information is extremely important. So you'll find a lot of that on my social media.
Wonderful. And we'll make sure to have that linked in our show notes as well for anybody who's interested. Okay, I am super excited. So first, before we get into your story, what recipe are you sharing with us today and why did you choose this one?
So it'll be my best recipe and the most thing that I'm famous for in my house, and it's Mom's Fluffiest Pancakes.
Okay.
I don't do a lot of the cooking in my household, and I am really good at following directions, and I love desserts.
Okay.
So pancakes is what we're making.
Gotcha. It's got the cake in there. Love it. Okay. So tell me, what are some of the steps to get me started, and then we can start chatting.
Yeah. So we start with our pancake mix.
Okay.
Again, I don't do anything from scratch, so I go box. You can go Bisquick. You can go Kodiak cakes, whatever it is that works best for your family.
Wonderful.
But we start with the pancake mix, pour in the milk, keep mixing until you get a really nice, soft consistency, nothing too thick. And then throw in an egg.
Okay.
And then in our house, we like to play with vanilla extract and pumpkin spice. We are
Wonderful.
a pumpkin spice year-round family,
Okay.
not just in the fall.
Yeah.
So that's what we do.
Wonderful. Okay, I can absolutely do this. And I know you mentioned, that you're using the box mix, but truth be told, right? So many of us parents, that's kind of what we have to do. Not everybody is a make it from scratch, and that's totally okay. The point is our kiddos are getting fed. So absolutely. So while I do this, I know one of the stories you wanted to share with us today, and I'm so excited to hear, is kind of your journey through navigating, trying to kind of be your own person and find yourself and what that means and all the dreams that you have for yourself at the same time, kind of some of those standards and how do you navigate that with kind of what's quote unquote expected of you. So I'd love to hear more. Can you start us kind of on your journey and what you've discovered?
Yeah. So I shared the first generation piece, and it wasn't just first generation college student, but first generation everything in my household.
Okay.
So first person to leave the house, first person to move away from the city that we all lived in.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The first person to live on their own, and just
Really?
all of it. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And fortunately, my mom was really supportive of go live your life, do the wonderful things, because she never got a chance to do them. So she was a teen mom.
Yeah.
She had me when she was 15.
Wow.
And from that moment on, she just dedicated to making sure that I had everything that I needed.
Okay.
And one of the big things that she instilled in me is you can do whatever you want. The sky is the limit. There are no obstacles. There are no challenges.
How was that for you as a kiddo?
Oh, I loved it. I was the most confident kid in the world.
Really?
And I was in every sport and I was doing all these things. And I thought I was great. I was not great at anything, but I had the confidence of being great. So I never felt scared or intimidated to try or do new things because I knew mom said I can do it. And if she's the smartest, strongest person I know, so if she believes in me, then of course it's got to be true.
Wow. Yeah. And to kind of have that person in your corner. So even if you do try something and maybe it's not your forte, it sounds like to kind of have somebody in your wing. That's really cool. Okay. So you're the first person to kind of go out and do these things. And one of them being going to college. Mm-hmm. So tell me kind of the decision to go, and how was that being the first kind of in your family to go out and do something? Because college is not an easy task.
Yeah.
So tell me more.
So I think I was maybe 3, 4 when my mom told me I was going to college. And so in my household, it was never a question of if, it was when and where.
Oh, okay.
And so at 3, I'm told you're going to college, and mm-hmm. I'm going to college. I think everybody does it. We're going to do it. I didn't have any idea of how tough or what it might entail going to actually college.
Okay.
And as I got older, it became, you're going to, UCLA, because I'm from Orange County. So that's the school to go to. Mm. So I had no intention of going anywhere else. Like that is where I was going.
Yeah.
And so when I got to high school, my mom did all the things to make sure that I was in activities, in sports, in clubs. I was getting tutoring, doing college courses, doing all these things to get ready for college, having, a resume, volunteer work, just everything.
Wow.
So
busy.
So busy. Very, very busy. So I applied to college, and I got into every college I applied to except for UCLA.
Oh, really?
So it was shattering, earth shattering.
Like, so then everything that you kind of like your plan,
everything that I knew was no longer true, that I can do anything. And so that was my first taste of, oh, I can't do everything. There may be some limitations. So I decided I'm not going to college. I'm going to quit. I'm just going to stay home and we'll figure it out. So I told my mom, I'm not going to college. I didn't get into the school I wanted. I'm just going to stay home.
Wow. So it really kind of rocked your world, it sounds like.
Oh yeah. And she's like, okay, we'll take the summer. Like, we'll figure out what you're going to do. And given that she didn't go to college, she didn't realize you need to accept admissions soon after getting admitted, or else your spot is gone. And you don't have housing, and you don't have dining, and you don't have the classes. So at the end of summer, literally maybe a week or 2 before fall quarter supposed to start, she says, where are you going? I told you, I'm not going anywhere. Like, that was a deal. She's like, no, you're going somewhere. Pick one of the schools you got into. And so I finally settled on a school, and we looked online, and there's an orientation in 3 days. So I have to be down in San Diego for the orientation. And I show up, and I have no idea what this campus looks like. I have no idea what classes look like. I didn't know the difference between quarter system, where I was going to live. I didn't have anywhere to live. I showed up to orientation, and I didn't have anywhere to live.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. That sounds just really scary. I'm going here, but I don't know anything else.
Nothing. And so I go to the orientation, and then I realize, Mom, I need somewhere to live. And she's like, oh, I think you have an aunt who lives in San Diego. And I'm like, you think I have an aunt who lives in San Diego? And she's like, yeah, let me call your grandma to call your cousin to see if we can get her phone number. You don't even have her phone number, and you're going to send me to live with some lady. I'm your oldest. I'm a girl. This is the first time anybody's living away. Wow. And you're just going to send me? And she's like, yeah, you'll be fine. Sure enough, this woman, my aunt, bless her heart, she took me in. She gave me a place to live. She helped me navigate San Diego. Eventually, I was able to find housing on campus, but it was just all of this. There was so much going on that I didn't have time to stop and process of, I'm in college, and I've got classes. I've got to figure out life. But once I finally moved onto campus, that's when the homesick and the nervous and the scared and the overwhelmed kicked in, because my mom and dad literally brought me to campus with all of my things and dropped me off and said, we love you. We'll see you later. And then walked down the elevator. And I'm just like,
oh my goodness.
So all this excitement of like, I'm in college, I'm independent, I can do all these things, quickly became I'm in college, I'm independent, I can do all these things. What do I do?
Yeah. And to kind of navigate, about how old were you at this point?
So I graduated high school at 17. So I think I had just turned 18 when I went to college.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So that's a lot for an 18-year-old.
Yes.
I know legally, right, you turn 18 and all of a sudden you're an adult. And I feel like there's so much of that, maybe facade that when you turn 18 and you become an adult, it means, okay, you get all this wisdom that like all of a sudden just like supposed to generate into you. Yeah. And it doesn't really happen that way.
No.
Okay. So first, before I hear more, is this a good consistency for me to add my?
Yes, that's perfect.
Wonderful. Okay. And so you went to school, and that sounds like, you went from I'm not going at all to now you have your PhD. So that's a big jump. So tell me more, and kind of how has that played into some of your parenting journey too?
Yeah. So it's actually an EDD, a Doctor of Education.
Okay. I apologize.
No worries. It's a common mix-up. But I thought I wanted to be a PhD, and realized Doctor of Education, higher education, access to education, that's where I can make the biggest difference. And that's the route I chose. And mostly I chose it because I am a mom.
Really?
Yes. So a PhD can take anywhere from 7 to 10 years. It's full-time. You're either in school, you're not working. There's no time really for taking care of yourself, taking care of your family, and doing all these things. And I did my EDD later in life. I already had 2 kids. I was already married. I already owned a home. I'd already been working, and we lived in a 2-income household. So there was no opportunity or way for me to say, hey, babe, I'm going to stop working and we're losing this whole income, and I'm going to go do this.
Yeah.
So I found an EDD program at UC San Diego. It's a joint program with CSU San Marcos.
Okay.
And it's designed for working professionals. And it was a very flexible program. They knew I had kids, and they knew that was a priority for me. And I said, when I do this, I'm not going to sacrifice my time with my kids and myself. So this program isn't going to be the first priority. It'll be in the top 3 or 5, but it's not the first. But that was something that came later in life. I didn't know I could advocate for myself like that. And I didn't know I can make those kinds of demands in my life. When I first had Zoe, which is my oldest daughter, I struggled because, again, I'm that first generation person. I'm the first in my friend circle to have kids.
Okay.
I'm the first in my family circle to have a child, and then also still want to work and still want to have a career and still want to accomplish the dreams that I had before, which was becoming a doctor one day.
Wow. So was kind of what you saw and kind of what was around you, this idea that once you had kids, that shifted kind of your identity?
100%. So what I had in my head, this model of you become a mom and then your life is about your children. It's no longer about you, and doing the things that you want and love and the dreams that you had before children, to me, felt selfish.
Really?
And it's not something that I was ever told,
Yeah.
out loud, but it's what I saw with my mom. Is she had kids, and it became about her children and putting them first. And her, mind you, was a drastic case because she was 15 at the time and literally had not even started her adult life, but that is all I knew.
Yeah. And so I'm so curious, because I think that's something I hear from so many parents, that there's this battle that almost happens between who you are as your own individual human being and kind of what you have dreamt since, a kid, as a kid yourself.
Yeah.
And then when you get into these roles, almost this expectation, and, whether it's my role is to stay home and be a family person, or my role is to go out and work and to be the breadwinner. I feel like there are so many parents out there that kind of have that box that they feel like I have to fit into, and I have to do it this way.
Yeah.
So I'm so curious, like, for you, what was going on internally, and how did you kind of make that decision or come to that decision to step outside of that?
Yeah. So growing up, I didn't have this notion of I want a big wedding and I want a white dress and be married. It was always this, you are a strong, independent woman, whatever you want, you can achieve it on your own. And so I never had this notion of, I'm going to be a great mother and I'm going to have children and the 2.5 with the picket fence. None of that. It was, I'm going to go to college, I'm going to get a great job, I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to save lives, I'm going to do, that was what I had in my head. Then I met my husband and everything changed. He was the first person I was like, I'm going to marry him. And I'm going to have his children.
Oh,
and everybody around me was just like, who are you? Like, what are you talking about? But again, being this first generation, I come from families of divorce, where marriages don't necessarily last. And there's not this, foresight of how do you make a marriage last and what goes into it. So I married my husband with no conversation of, do you want kids? How many kids are you going to have? How are you going to raise your kids? What's your religious preferences? What's your education preferences? Sports? Like none of these conversations had.
Wow.
And within the first 2 years of being married, I'm pregnant. And again, it's not something we talked about. It's something we knew we wanted children eventually.
Okay.
But none of these conversations happened. And in my head, I just thought, well, who has these conversations? Like, you just have kids and then you figure it out. It can't be that hard.
Life.
No, no, it's hard. And so I struggled, not during the pregnancy. During the pregnancy, it was fine. And then the second I had Zoe, I became just hyper focused on her, and it was only about her and no longer me and my husband and my partner in communication. It's this child, and how do I make sure that this child is okay? Because this is my priority, not me, not anything else. And I became so hyper focused that it started to eat at me, and it closed me off. And I realized I was struggling with postpartum depression.
In what way? Like how did that show up for you? Because I hear you mentioning kind of it eating away at you. You know, can you share a little bit more about for you and your narrative? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah. So I am a very social person. I love being around people. I love talking to people. I feed off that energy, and it just brings me to life. For the first 6 months after Zoe was born, I talked to nobody. I didn't even leave my house. Our sofa had a permanent indent in one of the cushions because that is where I stayed for 6 months.
Oh, wow.
I didn't go back to work. I was just struggling. I was sad. And my head felt like I was in this cloud, and I just couldn't see past, and I couldn't understand and make sense. If you would have asked me my last name, I don't think I would have been able to spell it. That's how just foggy everything felt.
Yeah. Wow. That sounds just so lonely, first of all, and overwhelming to kind of have these things happening in the midst of this brand new baby that you don't necessarily have a manual for, that, you know, you're trying to keep alive, and to kind of have to do that. And like you said, also figure out through that fogginess. Yeah. I mean, goodness, like how did you manage that? How did you see it? Did it impact your relationship? I mean, I'd love to know more.
Oh yeah, I struggled. So with my partner, Ignacio, there was virtually no communication between us. I didn't want to talk to him. I didn't want to look at him. I felt like he wasn't putting in as much as I was putting in.
Okay.
And I didn't know how to communicate to him. I just thought, you're a dad. You should know. If I have to figure this out and I'm a mom and I should know, then the same goes for you.
Yeah.
And so then it became about, I don't have time for this. I need to focus here. And it actually was my really good friends from college who knew me so well, who would reach out and say, hey, how are you doing? How are things going? They didn't have children themselves, but one was a therapist. And she, invited me to coffee one day at the mall. And she's like, how are things going with you and Ignacio? Like, are you guys talking? And I shared with her, like, I don't know if this is going to work with him because he's just not meeting me at this level where I need him. She's like, you communicated that to him? Does he know that? And I was like, no, he should. And I was like, how should he? She said, how should he know if he doesn't know?
Yeah.
And that was this light switch of, oh, there's a break in communication here. There's something going on that I should try to reach out.
Yeah. Wow. And, gosh, I don't know how many parents I've heard that same of, you should just know, because it does become really easy to kind of get into that groove of like, hey, I've got all of these things on my plate. And, that whether it's, I feel I'm taking on myself, or I feel like people are just kind of putting on me.
Yeah.
And so kind of, especially with such an intimate relationship, like, your partner, your spouse, your teammate, to kind of really get in the groove of, they've known me however long, we've been together. They should just know that this is what I need, or this is how to do it. And you're absolutely right that it does kind of create that breakdown for us when it's a lot of those expectations that are almost at this point surprise expectations because they aren't communicated. Yeah, you're so true. So right. So on point. So I'm going to get this going. Is it best? Do you usually like use a scooper to pour it in? Do you just...
So I do a little bit of oil, and then again, we just kind of feel it with our heart how big girls want their pancakes. So usually I make smaller size pancakes, and then they eat like 3 or 4, and they feel so amazing because, Mommy, we ate all your pancakes. But yeah, just maybe about that size.
Okay, perfect.
And I just pour it on in.
Awesome. So I'll get this started. I'm actually going to have us push pause so I can have a plate for us to put them on as well. And we're back. Okay, so I'm going to get this going. So once you have that kind of aha moment, tell me, where did you go from there? How did things change? Did they change?
From that conversation with my good friend, I started to realize there's something going on in my body that I'm not aware of and I don't know how to deal with on my own. So I think I started looking up depression and came across postpartum depression. I had no idea what that was. And there was a phone number at the bottom of the website that said you could call and you could get referrals or advice or just call. And so I called one day while Ignacio was at work and I was at home with Zoe. And this woman answered, and she had the most beautiful, calming voice and presence. She stayed on the phone with me for a good hour and a half. Talking to me. And I don't think that was her job. Like, she was a referral service, but she took the time to say, how are you doing? What is your child's name? What's going on? How are you feeling? And that in the middle of that conversation, I'm just crying my eyes out and crying and crying. And I couldn't understand why. And I realized I hadn't spoken to anybody about what I was feeling. I was just keeping it inside. And this person made me feel so safe and seen. And at the end of the conversation, she said, would you be open to therapy services or seeing a therapist? And I had no idea what therapy was. That wasn't something common in my family. And I said yes. And so she sent me a list of therapy professionals in my network. And I took a look. I found one. And I got blessed with a person who I met with. Just from the moment I walked in and sat down, the first thing out of her mouth was, as a fellow mother, I think mothers should have all the time in the world they need to bond. And if you need more time to bond with your child before going back to work, you let me know, and I will help write you a letter for that. And that first thing out of her mouth set the tone for the rest of our conversations and put me at such an ease. I didn't realize I was struggling with leaving Zoe and having to go back to work so soon.
Wow, that's so powerful. And to kind of have that person who at this point doesn't necessarily, it sounds like, know you, know kind of what's been going on, but just to kind of give you that, unconditional kind of positive regard of, hey, I'm here. This is hard. This is so hard. And you need to do whatever it is that you need to do for your life, for your well-being, and I'll be right here supporting you in whatever decision you make. Wow.
Yeah. And I had never had that in my life. And it was scary and overwhelming and uncomfortable to even be in this space, but to be met with such openness, it changed everything.
Wow. And so from there, I heard you mention kind of the struggle that you had that you didn't even realize at this point of leaving Zoe and going back to work. Can you talk a little bit more about that and about the decision then you ended up eventually making? How did you come to that decision? It sounds like it was not something that you took lightly. So I'd love to hear more.
I think, again, Ignacio and I didn't have these conversations about how long do I stay home? Who's going to watch her next? Who do we most feel comfortable watching her? Where am I going back to work full time? Am I going back part time? What can we afford? What makes sense for our family? And the therapist helped me realize some of these questions that I had that were unanswered and encouraged me to go back to Ignacio and talk to him and begin dialogue. So he and I started talking about these things, and I said, I want to go back to work. Actually, I really do. But I feel selfish leaving her. And who do we leave her with until we have a good plan? And so we sat down and, we identified my mom, and she came and lived with us for a year. And, this was after Ignacio took his paternity leave. But that I felt so safe. I knew I had peace of mind. Zoe is being taken care of by my mom. She's in good hands. I can go back to work. And I went back to work, and it was like this new day. Like, I get to shower and do my hair and makeup and talk to grown adults and sit, listen to music in the car and just have my own space. And I remember walking into the office and everybody being like, "Are you okay? Do you miss her?" I was like, no, I'm okay. I feel really good. Like, I'm excited to be here. Let's do this.
Wow.
And I had one coworker who was a mom, and she had a child the same age as mine. And she came back to work, and she was grooving it and doing well. And I was like, oh, you can do this. Like, you can be a good mom, and you can go back to work if you want to. And so that kind of planted the seed. So I started picking her brain and asking her questions about like childcare and, camps and clubs and activities and how she manages things. And she's like, this works for my house. It may not work for yours, but I'm happy to share what we've come to and kind of having those different perspectives. Once it starts bubbling, then you just flip over the pancakes.
Perfect. Okay. And so I heard you mention in there kind of this really key thing that I wanted to circle back to, if it's okay with you, that you could go to work and still be a great mom.
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. So I struggled with thinking that I needed to be a good mom meant that I needed to be at home and only doing things for the kids and the house, and whether that was cooking or cleaning or breastfeeding or, whatever, laundry, it was in the house. And I realized that for me, my personal happiness couldn't revolve around just in the house. In order to be me and to continue growing and thriving, I needed to feel like I could still accomplish the things that I wanted to. And so at that point, I still wanted to be a doctor.
Yeah.
I just didn't know how. And I talked to Ignacio and I said, I have plans. Like, I want to go back to work. I want to get a master's. I want to get a doctorate. I want to work full time. How do we make this work? And he was like, yeah, go for it. I'm not stopping you.
Wow.
And never did I think he was, but I felt again like I was selfish for wanting those things. And he's like, no, like, we will make this work however we make this work. And to have him, that communication and that, aha moment of, I have the support. I have a partner. I chose well. We're going to do this together.
Yeah.
And continuing to talk to him about what the next step was and what our calendar would look like for the next few months or the next few years, or what we could take on, what we couldn't take on. It really changed things.
Wow. I heard you mention kind of that narrative that you had of what it looked like to be a great mom. Now, was some of that, do you think, in relation to the fact that that's what you saw your mom doing, or were there other things that were kind of at play and really kind of constructing that narrative for you? Because I think it's such a relatable narrative.
Yeah, I think a big piece of it was my own family dynamics. All of the women in my family had children and stopped working. They worked in the home. And my husband and his family, he's the youngest of 4 boys. All of his brothers are married. All of the wives had children, and they took time off of work to raise their children. And at this point, everybody I see around me is focusing on their children. And that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to do multiple things, to show my girls that it was possible to do other things. And to find happiness in different areas. And the shows that I watched, I grew up watching shows that show, the woman in the house and the cooking and the cleaning and the hair and makeup always done and happy. And then the husband comes home from work and dinner's on the table for him. And so I have all these things in the back of my head, but me being this feminist of, I don't even know how to cook. How do you expect me to have dinner on the table? Like, I went to college. In college, we had a hot plate. Like, I wasn't making gourmet meals.
Yeah.
Like, I had top ramen and, fast food. And so there was so much conflicting going on.
Yeah.
And I was taught that I was going to go to college and have a career. I wasn't taught that I was going to grow up and be a mother and have children and be married and have a career. It was never this and, it was this or.
Wow. Yeah. And so to kind of have that person in your wing, like you said, your partner who's going, yeah, let's figure this out. At what point, I mean, maybe that was that point, but was there a point for you that you, not anybody else, but you gave yourself permission to go and like chase those dreams?
Yeah. Not until therapy much later did I have the words to articulate it, but I do have an impulsive kind of behavior or response. And I think personally for me, it is attributed to the confidence that I was given at a young age. I can do anything. Okay. I'm capable of anything and nobody can stop me. And yeah, there may be some bumps in the road and it's not always going to go as planned, but there is purpose and reason. And so, yes, now I'm a mother and I'm navigating this, but I still want to go to get my master's and I still want to go get my doctorate. So I'm going to show up to this orientation and kind of listen in. And if I think I can do it, then I'm going to apply and be like, hey, babe, guess what I did today? I applied for grad school. I think I've got a good chance, we'll see how it goes. That's how it happened. Oh and so he's like, okay, like we'll apply and then we'll take it from there and see what happens. Like we don't have to make a decision. We don't have to uproot and change everything now.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens. And so he's never told me no. Not that he can or should, but he can say like, hey, I don't think now is the right time, or let's sit down and talk, or how are we going to pay for this? Or do you have the headspace? What about work? What is work going to say? Like none of this. He's always been like, okay, let's do it. And I think he's very good at letting me learn from my own mistakes or letting me make my own mistakes.
Okay.
Because then I was in this moment of like impulsive. I applied, I got in, and now I'm like, how do I pay for it? He's like, so now we're going to sit down and talk, right? Like we're going to have this conversation and we're going to do budget. And he's this forward long-term thinker where I'm in the moment, in the action, like, how do we do this now? What's going on? And he's like, okay, well, I've got a budget for us. I've been thinking about this in the background.
Oh, wow.
This is how we can do it, or this is what would need to happen. I'm okay if you're okay.
Yeah.
So having his different personality meet my different personality where we were really worked for us.
Wow. And I also heard you mention in there kind of the importance for you, it sounds like, of also demonstrating kind of your narrative and the change in your narrative, rather, for your children. Why is that so important to you?
Yeah. Again, with the support of a therapist, I realized that in addition to me being impulsive, I also, now that I'm in a loving and supportive relationship, want to take Ignacio into consideration. And not just Ignacio, but the girls into consideration. And so when I make these big decisions or want to make these big decisions, I sit down and I think about it first and see how it would affect him and them. But at the back of my mind, what keeps pushing me forward is I feel like life, yes, is a marathon, but I'm starting from a place as a first generation, as a Latina, as a woman. I'm starting from back here in this marathon. And so for so long, I was in this sprint to just catch up to the start line where I felt everybody else was that I was running and I was in this survival mode. And I realized that, yes, it's a marathon. There's some sprints every now and then, but I want my girls to start their marathon much further than I started my marathon.
Wow.
And it may be something in my head that I've constructed, but it's something that my mom got me to a certain place and I'm going to get my daughters to a certain place. And this quote of we're standing on the shoulders of the generations that came before us, it's 100%. And it's what motivates me to keep going, not just for Zoe and Mila, but for every other child in the world who looks like them or is represented by them or has similar experiences or dreams or desires.
Have you seen that change even just in your small little circle of others maybe seeing, like you said, someone that looks like you, that sounds like you, kind of being able to do these things that maybe they've never thought I could do or that were possible? Have you been able to kind of see some of that?
Yeah, I've seen it in my own two daughters, Zoe and Mila. I joked that when I became a doctor, they were going to refer to me as Doctora. and they did for the first few weeks. And then it got old and you're mom again. But anytime we're out and somebody's like, oh, Miss Corona or Miss Amanda, my oldest is like, it's Dr. Corona or Dr. Amanda. And a part of me is very proud, not from this point of vanity, but from this point of just because I'm a Latina doesn't mean I'm a miss or that I'm not a doctor. Don't assume the other way.
Yeah.
And I've seen, since doing my dissertation and my defense, people have called and said, I watched your video or I was there and, I felt so empowered that now I'm looking into doctoral programs or I sent this to my coworker. Can I invite my coworker? Would you mind meeting with so-and-so? And for my own family, I'm the first to go to college and I was the first to graduate high school. And my younger sister and my younger brother in the last year, one of them got her GED.
Wow.
after years, and then one of them graduated from community college. And just not that I had anything to do with it, but to think maybe they saw something, and maybe their kids will see something, and maybe their friends will see something, and maybe that'll inspire or ignite and create these ripples in the world.
Was that difficult to step out of some of that generational kind of pattern?
It was very difficult. So I think I mentioned I was the first person to leave the home and move away, and I moved 70, 100 miles away. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I had to distance myself from my family and my community in my hometown, because if I had stayed, I would have fallen into that same cycle of, this is where we're at and this is what we do. But being over here and trying something new and making my own life, I was thriving, and I was challenged to figure things out. I think I struggled, though, to find connection with my younger brothers and sisters because they grew up without me. And I missed all of those, family birthday parties or holidays because I either had finals or was working or made San Diego my home now. So that's a relationship that I'm now starting to nurture and cultivate with my family.
Wow. So I'm very curious, like if you could, if you had a DeLorean and you could go back in time, is there anything that you would tell yourself, even just words now for somebody else who maybe is in that same position at the very beginning, where they can relate to even just a small part of your story? What would you offer to yourself, to them?
I think a big aha Back to the Future moment would be that you can have the life you've dreamt of. And just because circumstances change doesn't mean that that's no longer in the cards for you. It's just going to look different than you thought it was going to look like. And that's not bad, and that's not necessarily good. That's the cards you're dealt with. And it's up to you to make that conscious choice of, all right, this is the situation we're in. How do we move forward in this situation? And knowing that I could be a mom, and a great mom, and I could enjoy it and I could love it. And then I could also love and enjoy going to work and making a difference in that space as well. And you can even find a way to marry the two. And I take the girls to the university with me all the time at the events, and they're seen and they're part of this culture. And I think it makes me feel that much more connected to the work that I'm doing.
Wow. Do you think that, there's any part of you where that idea of this is selfish, does that still creep up for you, or have you been able to, kind of squash it enough that it's muted?
I think it's pretty muted, and it's something Ignacio shared with me. And again, he's this finance long-term thinker. The biggest selfish moment was, how can I go back and get a doctorate when I have two kids who I want to put through college one day, or want to help support through college? I should be saving for their college, not mine. That's so selfish. And he's like, well, maybe it's an investment in yourself so that we're in a better place to help support them when they decide what their path is going to be.
Yeah.
And I'm like, dang, light bulb moment. Okay, I will invest in myself. And sure enough, investing in myself, my happiness. I found my passion. I found what I love to do. And that is more than gold, is to show them what a happy person and a happy mom and a happy, human being can be.
Do you think that kind of that shift, that mindset shift of, as we say, putting on your own oxygen mask first, has that helped you be able to show up in a different capacity for your girls?
It definitely has. I've always struggled with that, being on an airplane and you save yourself before you save your child. No, that's so counterintuitive. We save the child. But I get that if I'm not in a good headspace, how can I model that for you? And a lot of it is for them modeling of, I'm frustrated and I'm overwhelmed, but I'm going to take a second, I'm going to breathe, and we're going to talk this through. Yeah. And so it's definitely helped me be more present for them and enjoy being present for them. And I say enjoy because for a long time it was, how do I continue to excel in my career while being a mom? And so when I was at home after work, after 8 hours of work, and I finally see the girls, and I'm like, okay, get dressed, bedtime, brush your teeth, all these things. And then I'm thinking about, okay, tomorrow at work, this is how I'm going to run that meeting, or, oh, I've got a great idea. And I just wanted them to go to bed so that I can start planning my work day.
Okay.
And I was struggling with, I'm not being present. Like I'm not enjoying, I'm not seeing them.
Yeah.
And the second I realized, no, like I'm going to close work door
Okay.
and open family door. And during this time, we're going to talk about like building Legos or doing a science project or uncovering gems or how stars are made, and enjoy it and be there.
Is there a specific routine or like a tip that you could offer of how you're able to, like you said, close that door, work is work, home is home?
Yeah. I am very big on calendaring. So
Okay.
I try to plan out my week as best as I can and looking at that day, the week on Monday morning. Okay, what does this week look like? Do we have activities? Do we have sports? Do I have meetings? Do I have a conference? Do I have a project that's due? And then plan around that.
Okay.
And so that also means like I'm not going to stay up till 2 a.m. and watch Netflix on a day that I know that I have to wake up at 5 a.m. to be at work for a presentation at 7 a.m. And so kind of being mindful of how I'm planning out and using my time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So aside from a therapist, were there any resources or, support groups or whatever that you found that would be helpful for any of our listeners that are listening that was a really big support to you in kind of navigating some of this journey?
Yeah, ERGs, so employee resource groups.
Okay.
If you are employed, check in and see if there is a group that's available to you. At my university, there's a moms group. There's a 0 to 5, a 5 to 10, and different groups based on your kids' needs or your kids' ages. And you can join these groups. But right when I got pregnant with my second daughter, again, this concept of now I've got two, maybe I should really stay home and focus instead of paying for childcare. Like maybe it's cheaper for me to be the childcare.
Yeah.
But I joined this moms group and I got paired with these 5 other working professional, strong, confident women who just supported each other and who talked to each other about resources, looking at, spectrum, autism, ADHD, breastfeeding, childcare, just felt like in this safe space to just talk about what we were experiencing, what was going on, even if it was our second child.
Okay.
I still knew being a mom with a toddler and a second child and working and marriage and school or work or all these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's so amazing. And I think that kind of that story, like you said, is such a relatable one. And I'm hoping that, our listeners are able to take a little bit of what you said and be able to internalize some of that idea that they can have it. Yeah. It may look different. It may mean working in other areas and kind of almost creativity, it sounds like, and kind of how it fits together. But that becoming a parent, although, like you said, there might be many shows that try to say that it's supposed to look this way and that's what you're supposed to do, that they are shows and that you've got to figure out what works for your own real life.
Yeah.
And for some, going back to work is not an option. And that doesn't have to reflect on your value and your worth as a parent or how much you care about your kids.
Yeah.
So that's really awesome. And I thank you so much for being willing to share that story with us and for your wonderful Mama's Fluffiest pancakes that we're so excited to eat. I'm sure the kids will love them. Well, thank you so much, Amanda. And thank you for joining us. And thank you all for listening. We'll see you back next time. If you or anyone that you know is struggling with any of the topics that we discussed in today's episode, make sure to check out our show notes for support and resources. You can get help. Thanks again for joining us on today's episode of The Real Family Eats. If you're a parent ready to share your real life parenting story, make sure to reach out to us in our website found in the show notes. And that goes for today's recipe, social medias, support, and resources. All of that can be found in our show notes. So make sure to check them out. And make sure to follow, like, share, subscribe, and stay up to date on all things The Real Family Eats. I hope you'll join us next time for more food for thought and thoughtful food. Enjoy your eats.